What if cancer isn't your enemy at all, but a wake-up call from your body? For decades, we've been told it's all about genetics, yet cancer rates continue to rise. Today, I sit down with the one and only Dr. Nasha Winters, naturopathic doctor, educator, and author. She's walked alongside thousands of people facing cancer and has now educated thousands of practitioners in a terrain-based approach to cancer. And she believes the real story of cancer is what's happening in your mitochondria. You'll hear why her motto is test, assess, don't guess, how to get out of overwhelm of endless supplements and diets, and why fasting became one of the most powerful tools in her own healing. Let's dive in. Hello, I'm Dr. Katie Deming, and this is the More to Heal podcast, where we explore holistic practices for cancer prevention and healing. Let's welcome Dr. Nasha Winters to the show. Dr. Nasha, I'm so happy to have you. Thank you for being here.
So mutual. We had such a great conversation when you got to hang out with me on my podcast, but this is a big treat to be on the other side of the table. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm super excited. And, I was listening actually on your site, drnasha.com. You have a beautiful video where you share your story. And I actually really encourage people to go there and watch it because it's such a beautiful speech that you gave. But you said something in that speech that I was like, she is just speaking my language. So you said, cancer is the ultimate wake-up call. How you choose to respond may have the greatest impact on your outcome than any treatment that you choose.
Oh, it gives me chills just even hear it because it's such truth across my 3 decades, 3+ decades in this field, both in my own experience going through a cancer journey, but also with the thousands and thousands of patients I've worked with directly and the tens of thousands I've worked with indirectly. It seems to be a very common sort of theme, and that the way, of course, that initial information is shock to the system, but when people can kind of recalibrate and meet it head on in a very different way than maybe our culture has given us the template for, I find that people definitely have different and better outcomes.
And what does that mean? Like, what is a different way than the way that we've been acculturated into approaching cancer? What does that mean for you?
Well, for me, it means, in 1971, which is actually the year of my birth, is when President Nixon started the National Cancer Institute and claimed the war on cancer. And I think that's where this conversation starts for me. But it made sense at that time because we were coming out of World War I, World War II, Korean War. We were still in the throes of Vietnam War. And that was sort of a unifying global experience at that time. And so it made sense to use a reference, a metaphor like that. But unfortunately, 50 plus years later, we've not won any wars. And in fact, we're almost flatlined as far as our outcomes. We may be living longer with cancer, but we are also being diagnosed more often with cancer. And we really haven't changed our overall survival rates using this sort of mental warring mentality. And that piece is one component of it. The other piece is that we get into these conversations around like the F cancer movements and I'm going to battle this and I'm in the fight for my, and there's something that just keeps that nervous system in such a hyperactive, sympathetic drive that doesn't allow healing, no matter how good the treatment is, to land. When we're in a sympathetic state, we can't receive anything. Standard of care, alternative care, or anything in between. And so I appreciate that people will resonate to what makes sense for them. But I've seen as a whole, when we continue to battle something that is actually us, that doesn't make sense to me. And when I can help people understand that maybe this is not an enemy, maybe this is more of, as you noted, a wake-up call or an opportunity or even a messenger of revisiting this in a different way to understand that cancer is us. It's part of us. It's an expression of us. How might we approach it differently if we come from that mindset?
Yeah. Well, and my listeners will know that I resonate with 100% with what you said, just given my TEDx talk on the battle language and cancer and all of this. And that's what I say. I say exactly that, is that Nixon was selling something. That's when we use this kind of language, when we're trying to mobilize, some kind of movement. But the problem is when we use it individually in our healing, you're exactly right, of that sympathetic activation, and we stay in that fight or flight state. And you and I both know from just being with so many people who are healing cancers that the healing happens in peace. The healing happens in a state of well-being. It happens when we are in a state of rest in the body. And you can't do that when you've got this battle that you're fighting. And then also we don't even mean to do it inadvertently. If our family members are talking like that, and then we're like, I don't really feel like fighting this, then it becomes this weird, just, it's all language, right? But it has an activation in the body. And so it's so important. And I love what what I heard behind what you're saying there is it's like, let's meet the messenger. Let's look at this as an invitation for, okay, how did I get here? Right. And I've heard you say this, and I've also said this, that we all have cancer, right? Like, we all have cancerous cells in our body, but we don't all develop tumors, because when you have a healthy human being that is loved and nurtured and nourished in the right ways, we're not amenable to growing cancer. And I think maybe that brings me to my next question, what is a metabolic approach to cancer, and why is that revolutionary?
Well, it's funny because your audience probably has heard you say this a million times as well, but just to give context, because I'm a story collector, and I really, really appreciate context when it comes to things like this. But back in 1914, Dr. Theodore Bovary is who gave voice to, or the idea of, the theory of the somatic mutation theory of cancer, cancer being something of genetic deformities, genetic manipulation that is basically bad luck and basically something that you're disempowered to do anything around. So that mantra has sort of played through for the past 111 years or so. But a few years after, another kind of quirky, somewhat controversial character came on the scene by the name of Dr. Otto Warburg, who said, wait a minute, I think there's something happening a bit upstream to the DNA damage, to the DNA expression. And that gave rise to this idea of the metabolic, or the mitochondrial theory of cancer, where he was observing that the mitochondria in our tumors and our tumor cells looked very different than those in our healthy cells, and that they were using energy in a different way. And that theory pushed out Bovary's theory for almost 30 years, where that was where energy, literally, I mean that pun, and as well as literally, all of our focus was in biochemistry and looking more at that aspect, until Watson and Crick came along in the 1950s, and actually a woman found the helix of the DNA, but they took good credit for it, and then it pendulumed us back over into this plight of the DNA being the cause of our cancer. And yet what we started to learn early on, as early as the 1950s and 60s, is that if this truly was a genetic disease, we would remove the hard drive, the nuclei of a cell, and we would replace the nuclei, say, of a cancer cell with the nuclei of a healthy cell. And if this was a genetic disease, you would turn that into a healthy cell. And the opposite is true. If you removed and replaced the nuclei of a cancer cell with a nuclei of a healthy cell, you should turn that into a cancer. In the thousands of times that has been repeated, that's never happened. And yet we have beat the drum of this genetic mutation, bad luck theory for so long now that we don't even see the forest for the trees. There was a really cool thing that happened, though, in that people like Dr. Mina Bissell from the 1980s started doing her research and speaking to the research about maybe we should look at what those cells, what the medium that those cells are growing in. Mm-hmm. And that was known as the extracellular matrix, that, the ECM that she started talking about back then, still, by the way, doing research and still sort of pushed into the corner. And then people like Dr. Tom Seifried started speaking to in his research, and then later his book, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, back around 2010, 2011, kind of dusted off the Warburg theory saying, hey, we've not made a big shift doing this genetic approach. Maybe we should reconsider our way of thinking about this. And then even as recent as a few months ago, an article came out in Nature suggesting that perhaps we're putting the DNA theory to bed, and that truly the metabolic theory is now one to pay attention to. And so what that means to me, now you have kind of a history in watching the pendulum go back and forth and kind of just sit there as well. What I understand it to be is that those mitochondria that we used to all be just taught in 6th grade biology was just producers of ATP, which is very important. You don't live with ATP energy. But we've learned a lot in the last 20 years or so that they do a lot more than that. And the way I like to describe it to colleagues and to patients is they do 3 major jobs. One of them is they take in, they're receivers of information, all information, food, water, light, sound, toxins, medicines, herbs, but also thoughts and people are taken in as information. Their second job is then to translate that information, make sense of it. And if all is working well in the translation device, then great, you're making sense of that and you're recognizing patterns and you're recognizing potential sort of trajectories. And then their third job is signaling, communicating out to the surrounding other organelles in the cell, the extracellular matrix, the surrounding cells, the surrounding tissues, the surrounding organs, structure, et cetera, and even beyond us. And so that's where the information has really gotten me excited in the last 20, 30 years, is that some of my first experiences with thinking about cancer differently was through kind of a quantum lens. I know that gets really esoteric there really quickly for people, but I started following the work of people like Candace Pert back in the early 1990s, who talked about the molecules of emotion and the fact that our thoughts can literally change our DNA expression and our immune system activities and even our microbiome, we're learning today. I even ran across the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who it would be another 20 years before his book, Biology of Belief, came out into the masses. So I was reading his research and applying it in my own life while it was still at the bench, long before it kind of was launched to the bedside in 2011 when his book came out. But those are the things I think of that we've missed. And you just kind of spoke to that as you asked me that question earlier. It's like, it's just information. A cancer diagnosis or a cancer expression is just the expression of information through that filter I talked about of, okay, what was put in, how was it translated, and how's it being signaled out? And that is much more hopeful about what we can do about that than what maybe standard of care for the past 111 years has told us we could do about that.
I've discovered one tool that has completely transformed how my clients heal, resetting their metabolism, activating the body's natural healing, and giving them incredible mental clarity. That tool is water fasting, and you can access my free workshop all about fasting as a healing modality right now. I cover how fasting actually works in your body, the different types of fasts, and how to know which approach is right for you. And most importantly, I cover how to do it safely. Whether you're navigating health challenges, have tried fasting before, or are completely new to it, this workshop is for you. I'll share real success stories from my practice and give you the framework I use with my clients. You can watch it now by accessing the link in this episode's description. This workshop could change how you think about healing entirely. Absolutely. Well, and you and I, I feel like a newcomer onto the scene, right? Like only been in this space now for, I don't know, like almost 2 years, I guess. And you've been like 34 years or something, but it's like, I'm catching up fast. But all of this is like, it's so resonant with me. Like as I left Western medicine and started to look at like something's wrong. Like I knew there was something wrong. Like I had been having these feelings since 2019 and I was like, I just can't. But it wasn't until I left the system that I could really start to see these pieces, because we're indoctrinated into these theories for so long. I mean, beyond medical school, then, I did a residency in radiation oncology, which is 4 years. So you did an internship in internal medicine, and then I did 4 years of radiation oncology. And in that, we have 2 years of radiobiology, which is all based on the genetics, and then 2 years of radiation physics. And so for me, it's almost harder actually when you've been so educated into these paradigms of the genetic model for cancer to really step out. But the one thing that I knew when I left, I was like, okay, 10% of my clients have genetic mutations. The other 90%, and I was mostly treating breast cancer, right? So it was breast and gynecologic cancers, but like 90% of the time I'd be like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. I know we say it's genetic, but I'm like, but we actually don't know. It's 90% of the time. And that just didn't sit well with me. And I love how you highlighted the history, because medicine is not an exact science, and it's political, and it's funding, and it's, who's in charge at the time to give, airtime to specific people. And so I love how you demonstrate that this is like been back and forth, and there's been the information there, but it depends on who's, in power and who's, driving things at the time. And it really is so important to understand this is not new. Like, This is not new information. Like, this is something that has been around for at least 100 years, but we're starting to understand and apply it and use it in ways that we can quantify. And that's why I love the work that you do, because you're such an advocate of studying the work that you're doing and really understanding it from a scientific perspective. So I'm wondering if you can explain, so now that you've explained it, like, what is a metabolic approach? Like, what does it look like, like tangibly for people, so they understand, like, what is it, the work that you teach this, right? And then you have practitioners who are then doing this approach with people. So just to be clear for my audience, that don't go to look to you're going to go see Dr. Nasha herself, because she's training hundreds, if not thousands of people to do this work. So tell us what that looks like.
Well, I should probably give a little, again, background context in that it's not like I woke up one day and said, wow, here's a really great methodology. I got this figured. It's been iterative over, as you noted, 34 years. And it started with my own journey. It started with simply put, a diagnosis of stage 4 end-stage ovarian cancer that was unfortunately missed for so long because I had so many previous comorbidities that we all just thought it was more of the same, right? And I also want to iterate that at age 19, when this happened, I didn't think myself unhealthy, despite I had diagnoses of things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, thyroid dysfunction, which later I learned was Hashimoto's, junior rheumatoid arthritis, IBS. Those were all my labels. But because they would just throw another pill on the pile, we just normalized it, right? And so by the time my diagnosis happened, they just was thinking, oh, it's just a flare of your IBS or a flare of your endometriosis. And all of those things were missed. And as someone who's functioned in the oncology, especially gynecological oncology, you can imagine those symptoms would have masked what was really, those previous diagnoses masked it. So in my original experience with this, I was not given any opportunities to do anything for standard of care because it was actually far too late. So simply put, I had 100% bowel blockage. I had a grapefruit-sized tumor in my right ovary. I had body filled with fluid where it shouldn't be, known as malignant ascites. I had liver metastasis. I had metastasis in all my lymph nodes and lots of little sort of shrapnel all over my organs and my abdomen. I had fluid around my heart. I was really, really sick, and I was on the end of the life game. And I was so sick they couldn't even offer me a single dose of chemotherapy. And in 1991, there weren't many other options beyond that, right? So it wasn't like, we've got some other options today, but none back then. So I was sent home to die. And my expectation wasn't to live it, to survive it, to fight it, to somehow battle it and win. I had a very curious brain, and I really wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand how it could have been missed. I wanted to understand that I'm not looking around anybody in 1991 and the other 19-year-olds dealing with something like this. I didn't know anybody in my peer group with cancer. Unfortunately, today, that's a very different story. But back then I just didn't know. So that's what led me on this journey. And the accidental moments that are, of course, you and I very well know are not accidental at all, that led me to some of my aha moments that allowed me to kick the can down the road a little bit further to learn something else and apply that, and then live a little bit longer to learn something else and then apply that. That was iterative for about the first 10 years. It was really touch and go. There wasn't Dr. Google. There was no internet. There were no books out there outside of some very antiquated old books. I didn't exist. I had to learn these things as I went along. By the time I was in medical school, I hid my diagnosis so I could get into medical school. I learned a lot of just because I left standard of care. I was going to go to standard of care medical school and ended up in naturopathic school instead because of this diagnosis. So I'm grateful for that because, as you noted, Dr. Katie, I would have had to unlearn a heck of a lot more to possibly survive this than what I was coming in sort of just green and fresh and unhindered by new information. Because I was a student still, I was reading everything else I could find that was not being taught in my courses, not being taught in my pre-med. And that's how I started running across these other people that I mentioned before. But that's where by the time I was in medical school and started working with patients, by the time I was in practice, started working with patients, I would apply the things I learned to myself to my patients. And as you noted, what also has happened over the 30 plus years is more access to really amazing testing and evaluations that didn't exist. And so I slowly over time accumulated tools and resources to follow people, their personal metrics, their data versus the dogma that surrounds us all, whether it's from standard of care or from the alternative care place. They're pretty dogma driven, both of them. And so that's what I've been doing. And in that, I learned a few things. I learned that there are 10 main sort of contributors. And this is my filter, my version. It's not the answer, right? But my perspective, there's maybe 10 major drivers of contributing to whether or not, what information is coming into those mitochondria, how it's being translated and how it's being signaled. So I call it the mitochondrial bucket. And there's, of course, your epigenetics. So things that were passed down from generations, but that you, as Dr. Katie referred to, have 90% of the time the ability to change that expression. So that piece is there. The other piece was, what are you fueling your cells with? So specifically what metabolic, your fats, your sugar, your proteins, your carbohydrates, and the combination of those, and even the quality of those food sources. What are you feeding your cells? And then the third is environmental. There was a time when we used to be able to test people and wonder if they had environmental toxicity. Today, we just know everybody does. We just don't know how it's reacting in that bucket. It's going to have a different behavior in each of us. My husband loves the smell of diesel. I get nauseous the second I smell it, right? We have different genetics, the way we deal with those things. The fourth is our microbiome, now all the rage in discussions and research. The fifth is even how that impacts our immune system, our immune function. The sixth is our inflammatory processes. The seventh is our oxygenation and perfusion processes. The eighth is our hormonal milieu, and how that's expressing and how it's interacting in the whole sort of neuroendocrine system. And then the ninth and 10th buckets are our sort of stress response and circadian rhythm, as well as our mental emotional. So all of those drops contribute. And all of us have different thresholds in our bucket. And all of us have different sort of priorities, like which one is really the driver. And that's what I've learned to do in the methodology I've created is this just simple test, assess, address, don't guess, is I evaluate what's in and teach clinicians and allied health professionals and advocates how to evaluate what's in each person's bucket and help create kind of a priority list and an approach that is also iterative, recognizing that not a single treatment is going to do it, right? It's you start here, you retest, and then you iterate, you pivot where you need to. And you're constantly playing in this feedback loop between yourself, but also your team that's supporting you on this journey.
Yeah, I think that it's so helpful to hear you outline it like that and really help people understand, because they're like, I don't understand what the different, and I love how you said that, the dogma, both in the standard of care and also in the alternative, because there is, but that's the one thing that I love about your approach is it's very systematic, and what did you just say? Test, assess, don't guess. Yeah. And it's a balance. So it's interesting because this has been just a process for myself as I've transitioned from Western medicine, is that, coming from Western medicine and we have very specific things that we test that are, different than the things that you're testing in this realm. But So I was used to testing those specific things. And then I came out. And then what was interesting is I actually got kind of afraid of the functional medicine approach of like the 1,000 tests and the 1,000 supplements. And so it's interesting. I think that there's this balance too of like, you could literally be testing for everything all day, every day, like thousands of dollars and thousands of dollars of supplements. And can you speak to that, how your approach is different than a functional medicine approach? Because it was funny because I was thinking, oh, Western medicine, you come out, and then I felt like it's so naive, right? It's like, I feel like they're all kind of similar. And I'm like, oh, wow, no, these things are really different. And then you start to realize like, okay, what are the different aspects? So I'd love to hear your take on functional medicine and how maybe your approach is different or the same or what.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the functional medicine community, the naturopathic community, the sort of vitalistic medical community, all say the same things. We all kind of have the same sound bites, if you will. And we're all like, oh, we get to the root of the cause and we're dealing with the patient. But there really is a difference. I think that a lot of folks drawn to the functional medicine realm are expats, if you will, of the standard of care model. And they're accustomed to the concept of here's this one target, here's this one test, here's this one symptom, here's this particular treatment. And so we continue to treat symptoms, even though we think we're getting to the root. We say, oh, you have this blood deficiency, or this lab is showing this, we have this supplement, or this modality to address it. Well, you can do that, but then very quickly, which is what I see and what you're alluding to, those patients are now on 50 million things, right? And I feel like I think it freaks people out when they would come in with their suitcase or their multiple bags of stuff. And I'm like, we're going to throw all these away, or at least put them away for now. And we're going to prioritize. We're going to prioritize based on what are the biggest red flag, obvious, lowest hanging fruit things that are saying, help me now. We're going to do something for a few weeks. We're going to retest. And once that's cleared out and kind of triaged, then we look at what has bubbled to the surface and work through it that way. It's way less overwhelming. It's way less expensive. You actually do then know what's doing what. And so I tell people that there's a lot of people out there with amazing clinics that have a million different cool tools. I call them the sexy tools, like, oh, I do metronomic chemo and I do off-label drugs and I do IV vitamin C and hyperbarics and hyperthermia. And I'm like, that's like a 2-year-old with a Maserati. Like, great. You have this amazing machine, but you don't know how to use it in a sophisticated, personalized way, which is finding the right dose, the right duration, the right combination, and the right iteration for that person. And so that's when I feel like I get to help train the doctors back into, especially those who come in from a functional medicine background. They're like, you mean I don't keep them on these 100 supplements? I'm like, no, let's come back at it through a different lens and let's look at patterns. That's what we're starting to elucidate. What are the patterns? What are the main patterns? And then let's address those individually, or maybe 2 or 3 at most at a time. What happens, and you have probably seen this a million times, again, where we started our conversation today, if a patient is in a state of duress, anxiety, stress, I don't care how good the treatment is, how good the naturopathic treatment, the integrative treatment, the functional medicine treatment, the standard of care treatment. I don't care how good the plan is. If that person is in that state of duress and that has not been addressed, whatever that therapy is coming in is not going to land. It's not going to land as intended. It may screech the surface a little bit, but it will not integrate in and really move the needle on the dial. And so I have a lot of people who find me and they were like, I've done all the things. I changed my diet. I took all these supplements. I did my walks in the park and I watched the sunrise and I wore my turned off my EMF and I'm still a mess. I'm like, well, then let's actually talk about that. Like, how does that feel when you even tell me that story? And they're always in like an extreme stress and duress. And it's like, well, why don't we start there? And even though I kind of talk about the 10th drop in the bucket being the mental, emotional, or the stress response, and kind of leaving that at the end, if we scooch that up to the front, we have a lot more impact and a lot different and better outcome. But the reality is, if I started there with folks, they would close that book right up, put it on a shelf, never look at it again. So we lead them there through the little sort of morsels, the little, nuggets, if you will, that lead them, oh, I can do the tangibles. And then we walk them gently, as quickly as they're willing and able, to the intangibles that are, there's not a pill, a potion, a remedy, a treatment modality on the planet that can deal with that head on until they really meet themselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving that, because that is the hard part. It's like, I mean, grocery bags, like coming in with like 3 bags worth of supplements. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's just I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed even thinking about it. Like I can't, and this is one of the things that you hear so common in the cancer space. It's like, my whole day is like figuring out when I can take this supplement versus this one, and I can't eat with this. And it just becomes like their whole day, like that person that you described, doing all the things. And it's almost like this checklist that they're like, I just got to do the check boxes. But I love how you talk about, okay, what is the main thing for you that we need to address first? And then addressing that. And also what that does is that it reduces overwhelm, which overwhelm is like the number one problem in my mind for people who are healing cancer. That is the thing I hear all day long is I'm completely overwhelmed. I don't know who to trust because there's 1,000 things out there and everyone's saying something opposite, right? You can find, there's this person saying you need to eat a full raw vegan diet. And then these people saying, no, plants are poison or what, all the things. And it's just so confusing. So I love that you really have it data driven and then looking at, okay, like what is the first thing that we need to address and keep it manageable. And then I wanted to bring something up because when you were describing that with the stress and the mental emotional, component, and one of the things that I have noticed, this is just something in my limited experience in this new space, is that the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of the cancer are hard to address until you get someone's diet corrected. So can you speak to that? Is that a true thing? I'm like, if I don't get your diet corrected, I'm sorry, but like the emotional stuff is almost impossible to do. Do you have that experience as well?
Oh my word. Well, it's, I think about myself back at that time. So I came from extreme poverty. We were latchkey kids and we lived on extremely highly processed food. So that left my nervous system really malnourished and really in a lower immune state. Add a 10 out of 10 ACE score to that, adverse childhood events. I was like, I was kind of screwed from the get-go, really, in those pieces. And later on, I learned my epigenetics. I'm like, wow. I mean, it was kind of, of course I had cancer. Like those are the way I look at it today. But I wasn't able to think rationally in those first few years. It was so externalized, rushing to all the things, because my body was literally starving to death. And so for me, my problem was that I'd been what I call a junk food vegetarian. Really, I was a carbitarian from age 16 until my diagnosis. So I was already malnourished before I became that because of just the poor nourishment for being extremely, extremely poverty stricken. So then I went to that, which got rid of a few other important nutrients. And then when I got diagnosed, the only information out there was about going like Gerson or going very, very, raw food vegan. And I did that for the first several years. And I can't even tell you, I can't believe I survived that, honestly, because I was so also dogmatic about it that even when my clinicians were telling me when I was in medical school, looking at my labs, looking at my tongue, feeling my pulse, because we had Chinese medicine doctors on my team too, they're like, you're dying. Like, you're so malnourished right now. You have to bring on an egg. They were just like, please, for the love of God. And then I became a vegetarian for 17 years after that, which helped because the lights started to come on as eggs and a little bit of dairy, but I was really reactive dairy. I just had to learn iteratively along the way, but my brain did not function the way it needed to. My rationale, my emotional lability, was really there. It was super emotionally out of balance. And that's what I've seen with my other patients is that until we can deeply nourish you, settle that nervous system, give your body the building blocks that it needs to repair, to actually evaluate the environment, to be on recon of are those cells doing what they should be doing? We don't have those tools when we're malnourished. And there's even a whole emerging field known as metabolic psychiatry, of which we've been able to show clinical trials, not just theoretics, of people reversing things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, even anorexia nervosa with carbohydrate restricted diets to help the brain retrack and connect to the gut in a very different way. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't see people being able to spiritually bypass a crappy diet. I don't. Yeah. I don't see people be able to just diet away and bypass the traumas or the emotions in their lives either. They really are kind of a dual track. And we've gotten so much more data in the last few years, really showing the impact of how our microbiome is sort of the connecting point between our brain and our gut. And so very responsive to the information we feed it. And so it's easy to see changes in the brain if someone's living on too many carbs or processed foods or chemical induced foods. It's easy to see that light up on the brain maps. It's also easy to see that in people's labs. And so if we can work with them together, you're going to move further faster when you're addressing both simultaneously.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so interesting though, how I was like, I wasn't making progress on the emotional and stuff if they wouldn't be willing to do both, and so it's like exactly as you said. So now I always start with like, okay, let's make sure the diet is, helping them get nourished. And, obviously we're like chronically malnourished as a society and just not getting the right foods. And then also the information that's been given, the food pyramid and all of that did not help. Right. So that's like really helpful to hear that piece. And then what I want to ask you about actually, because I know that you've done some fasting and that now I've become like super fascinated and basically going all in on fasting. What has your experience been with prolonged water fasting, both personally, and then I know you've had a lot of, seen a lot of people do fasting as well in relation to cancer specifically?
One very important part of my history was, as mentioned at the time of my diagnosis, what landed me partially in the ER was excruciating pain, which led to realizing I had a complete bowel blockage. And so even in standard of care today, we'll usually hospitalize somebody and do what they call bowel rest. And that's typically like nothing by mouth. And sometimes they do an NG tube or something, but basically they say, don't eat, right? That's our solution. And let's see if it resolves on its own. And if it doesn't, then we do surgery. Well, that bowel blockage, they literally sent me home to die. I'd come back in to have my fluid drained every few days for the first few weeks, and then once a week for another few weeks, and then a couple times a month for another couple. And that, kind of took about 4 or 5 months before the ascites was dried up. But for me, what's really interesting is the accidental aspect of every time I ate, it caused excruciating pain. It caused extreme nausea. And then it created this sort of psychological aversion. And so I didn't eat at all, Katie, for 2.5 months. 2.5 months.
And no TPN, like they weren't giving you TPN or nothing?
No, they didn't want to know anything that I was doing. It was incredible. Like I couldn't get anybody to monitor me, nothing in the beginning. And so
you literally fasted for 2.5 months just because I couldn't eat?
Yeah. And I could sip on it. I managed to be able to sip on, like chew on ice cubes, sip on water, like very tiny sips, because even if I took a little bit more, I would just throw it up immediately. And I ran across something in my studies about something known as Pal Darco T. Tibebia is its Latin name, and that it had some impact on ovarian cancer cell lines. So I managed to find that in a local herbalist and made that by the gallon and sipped on that throughout the week. That's it for 2.5 months. I didn't know anything about salt. I didn't know, it would have been really nice to know the things I know today. It would have been really nice. But I think because I'd lived the first 19 years of my life in such extreme inflammation, autoimmune dysfunction, immune dysfunction in general, psychological distress, vagal nerve distress, like all the things, it was actually such a welcome relief to my body because it could focus on healing other things. Mm-hmm. And so for me, when I did start to eat, I kind of didn't choose the best things in the beginning, but I know better now. It was so profound for me that was something that I kept doing throughout and have been ever since for 34 years. Fasting has been I easily fast at 3-day water fast every single month for 30 some years, right? And then different times of the year, I might do a longer one, 10 days, 2 weeks here and there. that was long before we started getting research from people like Walter Longo and others. It was Fasting Cancer came out recently. He's a little more plant-based and a little higher carb than I'm favorable for, but he still talks about this. And then I ran across, in my early years coming out of my diagnosis, I ran across the work of a man by the name of Dr. Mareshi from 1909, who showed the absolute debulking impact of a tumor just from fasting alone. And we naturally fasted people up until the 1960s, until somebody in the industry got an idea of, hey, we should give them things like Ensure and Boost instead. And we should make sure that no matter what, they don't go hungry, and that no matter what they eat, and no matter what, they don't lose weight. We completely lost the understanding that cachexia, muscle wasting of cancer, is actually driven by overfeeding and undernourishing, and specifically by the macronutrient imbalance of giving it all carbs. So even in the American Cancer Society food recommendation, like go and have a Dairy Queen Blizzard, or make eat angel food cake pre-made from your grocery store, or gelatin, Jello, not good Jello, but like red dye number 80 Jello or whatever. That's literally still in the ACS playbook of what to eat if you're going through a cancer diagnosis to not lose weight. And it's all carbs, all sugar. And yet that's what kicks up the cytokines, that drives the inflammatory processes, that drives more of this muscle wasting, which can claim the life of between 50 and 70% of patients dealing with cancer, depending on the research you look at. And so I accidentally stumbled into the world of fasting, and it was probably what saved my life when I chose to go a very high carb route for the next 17 plus years. It's probably what saved me.
Oh,
right? Mm-hmm. And then in 2009, when I started really understanding, because then people were starting to be able to talk about fasting. We weren't allowed to talk about fasting. We weren't allowed to say the word ketogenic, even though I started putting my own patients in 2003 on carb-restricted diets and started working with fasting and leading group fasts and leading these processes. We kind of do it in the closet, right? And so it's just been such an interesting place that now it's probably the most profound tool we have in the cancer space, and it's free.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, and that's a fascinating story that basically you were forced into it from, basically because you couldn't eat with a bowel obstruction, and then that you used it, all through those years doing 3-day fast. And then you've done the longer fast. So you've done like a 14-day fast.
Yeah.
And what was your experience doing that?
I told my husband I would very easily be a breatharian. Like I feel my whole body and being always feels better fasted. And I know I'm hearing in my head all of those who are like focused in the disordered eating space. It's not that. It's not about a fear of food. It's about something that happens in my psychology, in my physiology. Ketone bodies and I are really good friends. It just smooths the ride of all my life, of all my inflammatory processes, of all of my weird, I'm missing GSTP1 and GST1. These are SNPs that mean I don't detox well at all. Actually, I have to help my body. So I think it gives my body a support for that. I have a lot of issues around inflammation and autoimmune conditions. So it just turns that faucet right off on those processes. It calms my nervous system. It actually changes my HRV drastically, where for some people it might impact it as stress. My body perceives it as rest. And that's the way it's been for me. So for me, I get by day 2, I'm a little peckish because it's more habitual. By day 3, I feel like I could keep fasting forever. Yeah. And I have to really, I now pace myself. I'm like, I'm only going to do it for 3 days or for 5 days or for 10, because I could do it forever. And having been at the worst of my health and surviving, and not just surviving, but thriving for 2.5 months without it, I know what my body is capable of. So I have no fear or concern. And I'm also very good at listening of when it's time to break that fast and how to break that fast. I'm really, really cued in on. But yeah, it's a tool that is still my favorite go-to. And if I get, I was on the Camino for my 50th birthday, I walked 5.5 weeks on the Camino Norte by myself with a 22-pound backpack. And in the first week, I got a gluten exposure and I forgot to bring my low-dose naltrexone. I was in excruciating pain for the next 2 weeks. And TMI, did not poop at all. I had to TMI, manually remove things after about 2 weeks because I was going to end up with a bowel blockage again, and I was never going to go down that road. So I managed to go and water fast only, lots of electrolytes though, water fast only with electrolytes for 5 days, walking the Camino, putting in an average of 28 to 30 kilometers a day with a 22-pound backpack. I felt freaking fantastic. And I would have kept it going, but I thought to myself, no one's going to believe me when this is done. And I blogged about my experience, but it took all the inflammation away, all of it. It got my bowels moving again. It got my psychology racked in it because it was rough going there for a couple of weeks. And so it was a tool that I lean on again and again and again and encourage and support people. And I love, oh my gosh, I love that I have colleagues that I can now send people to safely do these longer term water fasts who also then know how to carefully, safely, appropriately bring them back out of it at the end. Because there's a lot of people doing long water fasts, but there's not a lot of people pulling them out of it correctly. And so I'm grateful for you to that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the only reason why I'm doing it. Because I was like, oh no, there are people who do this. So let me just send my clients, water fasting is great. So I'll send them. And the truth is that it makes sense for what many of these facilities start. They didn't start in the cancer space, right? So, and they're plant-based, and doing amazing work. Like I love the work of Dr. Goldhammer and True North, and amazing. But then with the specific lens of cancer, I was like, oh no fruit juice. Like just with the refeeding and all of that. So for me, it was more like a necessity where I was like, okay, there's a need, in this space. And then also I was seeing just such profound, it's so much more, and you're describing that. People really get quiet and calm inside themselves. And remember, we said the number one problem is overwhelm. Like the fasting really, and most people don't feel amazing the way that you feel because your body is used to functioning on ketones. And a lot of people come in, they're like, the first 5 days are horrible because they have the keto flu and they're, just getting used to that. But they get quiet inside, and that quietness, and then the emotions come to the surface, right? So not only are you detoxing the toxins from your fat cells, but then also the emotional detox. And for me, it was like, when I saw the first few cases of the autophagy and cancers going away, I'm like, I'm sold. Like, I never saw anything like that in Western medicine. I would have thought that was a miracle, Yeah. And so that brought me in. But then what's kept me in this space and now really having me go full forward is that it is really one of those beautiful mind, body, spirit healing experiences. And it's hard, not everyone feels great, but that's part of the growth and the, beauty that comes out of it is really those, the challenge. I tell people, we're going on a vision quest. Your vision quest is going to look different than the person next to you who's, in their home. But this is really like they're going into the wilderness, alone and, finding themselves through the process of fasting. It's really beautiful. And obviously it's like such an ancient practice, that we just lost track.
Exactly. Every spiritual, system out there has this as part of the journey. I mean, it's just incredible to me that we have kind of gotten away from it and we've gotten away to just really fearing, putting the fear of God in people of, don't fast no matter what, don't go hungry. And we've just put ourselves like, you must have your 3 meals a day with your snacks in between. And if you go more than 2 hours, you get uncomfortable, you better stuff your face again. Like we have gotten so uncomfortable with being hungry. Being hungry isn't a bad thing. And especially when you start to learn to get clear about what's hunger at that physiologic, I truly need to feed myself something. And then what's hunger for something missing in your life.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that when they're fasting, we have them come off social media and limit screen time, and then they're not working. And it's that discomfort of the food was a coping mechanism. The overworking was a coping mechanism, the screens and the social media and all that stuff. And we have not only learned to not be we haven't learned how to be with hunger, but we haven't learned how to just be with ourselves.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, when we started this whole conversation about one of the key roles of the mitochondria is being a receiver of information. And when you think about what type of information we are exposed to today versus our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, we have so much more input than ever in human existence. and it is overwhelming our mitochondria. And so when you bring a tool like this, you literally diminish the input and allow the translation to start to work properly again, and then allow new signaling pathways to spark and to do their thing. It's so powerful. Like, it's just incredible to me and so underappreciated.
Yeah, I love that description of the mitochondria. Exactly right, what you said. So I want to switch topics and ask you about, you have this vision for a fully integrated oncology hospital. And I don't know if you and I talked about this, but in addition to being a radiation oncologist, my role in cancer care was really running end-to-end cancer care for a very large healthcare organization. And my last thing that I was nominated for right before I had my shared death experience was to become national medical director for all of cancer care for one of the largest healthcare organizations. And so I love thinking about things globally and what, can be with care. So I'm so curious when I saw this, vision that you have. I'm so curious. Please tell us, what is that about?
Well, funny, about maybe a year and a half, 2 years into my process, in the midst of a fasting moment, I started having what I could best describe as downloads. They were dreams, but they were in waking states dreams. And I started just feverishly writing these things down because what I was seeking didn't exist then, right? And frankly, to this day, doesn't quite exist. I mean, there's elements of it more than ever before, which is super cool, but the whole package doesn't really exist. A lot of people say it does or think they have what it is, but it doesn't. And so what this looks like is a 150-bed residential inpatient oncology center and research institute on a 1,200-acre organic regenerative farm among a sort of an intentional community of helping show people how to live in accordance with the nature around them and within them in a very different environment than what we have now been given. Like, we've normalized what we are exposed to today in such a way that our cells are inside going, no, wait a minute, this isn't normal. And they're rebelling, right? And that's why we're seeing more and more of these chronic conditions, including cancer. And so helping people, when a doctor often would say to a patient, you need to eat better and exercise. Well, they don't really tell them or show them what that looks like. And they don't tend to personalize it. And they don't tend to really then evaluate, like we used to have home visits, clinicians not too long ago used to do the home care. So they'd see what's happening in somebody's environment. They would feel what's happening in the relationships. They would walk in and smell if they smoked or if they used, today you'd smell like fragrances and all the things. You actually got a sense of what people were exposed to and living in on those times. We are so far removed from that a patient can show up and tell you exactly what they think you want to hear. And you don't get to really be with them and meet them where they are. And so the other thing is, when you wanted to seek something alternative or out of the sandbox of standard of care, you had to go to great lengths, typically far away from your home, to find those things. And you also had to use resources that you typically didn't have. And you'd have to rob Peter to pay Paul to get to those things. And then you also create this polarity of alternative versus standard of care, and that you could never see those two come together. And so even now, I think we're up to 88 big integrative, big academic institutions in the United States claiming to have an integrative oncology department. I honestly feel like most of those are just like a repurposed broom closet with a little sign on the door that says integrative medicine department. And then you still have to go through a maze to find it, and you still have to pay out of pocket, and it's totally siloed, and it's not truly integrative. Right? Or you have the alternative clinics in different parts of the world that will completely shun anything of standard of care, and they may say they're doing all kinds of really cool testing, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're not using metrics that are actually third-party validated, and able to weave it all together. So I always imagine this place where everything is there. You have your blood draws, you have your imaging, you have your proton load, fractionated radiation, but it's partnered with, you go and oxygenate before you come in so you can potentiate the therapy, and you load that patient up on being in maybe some exogenous ketones and high dose melatonin to radiosensitize those cells. Can you imagine doing all that right there and going right into your radiation treatment? Like that, it's really hard to find that.
Yes.
Right. Or the same being like, okay, I want to do chemotherapy, but I want it to be based on my personalized testing. And I want to do it at a metronomic dose that is not insulin potentiated, because there are people doing metronomic, but it's still paired with something that we've unfortunately still use, despite the evidence suggesting that that's probably not a really good idea. We didn't know about insulin and insulin growth factor when we use this tool. We can certainly push cancer back with that, but we can't keep it back with that therapy. And so we can actually potentiate metronomic chemotherapy being in a fasted state and with beta hydroxybutyrate. Those are really powerful tools to be in a same environment as well. So the future of oncology is no longer choosing either or. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely an and it's absolutely integrated, and it's absolutely in an environment that is just as healing as the tools themselves, where you have access to, like, the patients are on the fields with the farmers, and the farmers are in the kitchens with the chefs, and the doctors are in all the places together to know how to truly cultivate and create health versus just fight disease.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. I love it. And I think that for me, that's the sad part actually about, like, having been so firmly in the system and then leaving the system and then realizing there really is this chasm between. And it's funny, even with my old colleagues, like, it's funny, I ran into like a group of male surgeons. So it was like, plastic surgeon, a surgical oncologist, a colorectal surgeon, a GI doctor, endoscopist. And they all used to actually report to me through, the cancer leadership. So these are people that I have like really respectful relationships, right? But it's funny because I ran into them like 6 months. They were going on some like guys trip to Arizona or something. I ran into the airport, and I remember like being there and talking to them. They're like, so what's new? Like, what are you doing? And I was like, water fasting. It's incredible. I'm like, did you know that you can make tumors go away with fasting with water? And I just remember, and they're so sweet, right? And these are people who, like, I have a respectful relationship with, but I just remember them looking at me, they're like, oh, wow, like, she's really lost it. She is off the reservation now. And I just remember leading that and being like, okay, wow, like, everybody's not ready for this. I do think we are ready for this in so many ways. Like, people are asking, like, demanding it, right? Like, patients are saying, I'm not going to just do this route. And also, I love that Walter Longo's data around the fasting mimicking diets, even though, like, with the eating, it doesn't match up the fasting and the concepts, and also the data, because now it's easier to have conversations with medical oncologists and say, well, there is data around fasting, around chemo. And I think, though, this idea of having some place where you can really do these therapies, because there are, I see a lot of non-oncologists giving chemotherapy in these low dose and insulin potentiated. And to be honest, I don't like, it's dangerous. Like, this is a dangerous world. And so if you could have people who are trained in oncology and really understand this, working alongside with the people who get the integrative component, rather than being like, well, all bad chemotherapy is bad, so I'm going to take this person who's never trained in oncology, and now they're just going to give low dose chemotherapy, and somehow that's better. To me, it's very dangerous. And so what you're describing is leveraging the expertise of the people who have trained within the different systems and bringing them together so that we can all speak the same language and collaborate to create something truly new, which what we have right now is an old system that's fragmented, and then everyone doing their best outside of it. And like you described, like, there are a lot of these centers, like I describe them as like Disneyland for cancer, where you can go and you can do, you can spend $100,000 like that and like do all these things that I'm like, but I don't know actually what the data is to support all of this, right? So to have something where people can go and they have access to that, and then also knowing that it's founded in science and, evidence. I really, really love that. And I hope that that's like, is that on the horizon? Is that?
The land has been donated. The pro formas have been created. The architectural renderings are done. We're just we've put our energy and focus on educating clinicians and patients, allied health professionals and patient advocates, because you got to have people working at that hospital. And we've created a data platform that's about to go live to actually collect these metrics and show that we do have different outcomes than just standard of care or just alternative care, to show that that integration is truly integral to changing the conversation. And so having all of those now in place, we're now ready to go out to the Capitol, to ask for the capital campaign of, here's the $250 million it's going to cost to build this 250,000 square foot, 150 bed hospital and research institute. And so that seems like a lot of money to some people. But when you look at, say, a remodel of just one wing at MD Anderson costs that much, this is building an entire new model, not a fresh coat of paint, on a broken system. And so that's where we get very excited. And even in my training programs, I always thought that people more like naturopaths and alternative doctors would be interested in taking my program. 70% of our students are from standard of care. And out of that 70%, we have a growing number. I would say probably upwards of 10% of that are now standard of care oncologists, surgical oncologists, radiation oncologists, medical oncologists, who say, enough. What I'm doing is not enough. I have to do something different. And it's not to say what they were doing was wrong. It can just be done differently and better. Just like with the alternative folks saying, well, I'm not going to, spend that money on this type of treatment or this type of testing or this type of evaluation. But it's that information that tells us what's working and what's not working, or where to start. And that there's some really amazing tools out there today to actually tell us very specifically, hey, this particular chemotherapy with this particular off-label drug, with this particular natural therapeutic, in this timing, dose, duration combination is your, bullseye. Like, that is what we actually are doing that right now. Why is that not standard of care?
I love it. Well, I am your biggest cheerleader, and just praying that money rolls in. And it's actually, when you think about the people who are interested in seeing something like this come to life, there is that money there. So I know that that's going to happen. And also, you're perfectly positioned to do something like this in a way that is impactful, right? Like really shifting the narrative and shifting the literature, really creating a new path. So I'm so grateful for the work that you do in the world. I'm so grateful for you taking an hour out of your time to be with me and share with my audience. And I look forward to seeing you at your event in October. So tell everyone about your event that's coming up.
Well, we are bringing together the best of metabolic regenerative health with regenerative agriculture and soil remediation and environmental medicine under one roof. And we have a brilliant group of over 35 speakers and panelists, including this amazing human being, Dr. Deming, coming in to share their wisdom, their knowledge among hundreds and hundreds of people, both in person and virtual, to help be part of the movement to change this narrative. And so I'm very excited about that event. We've never hosted our own conference, but I can't believe the caliber of people coming forth to share their wisdom and to inspire people, both in person and virtually. So it's Metabolic Health Day Conference, horrible name, I know, but it happens on Metabolic Health Day, which is the 10th of October, and then the day after, the 11th of October, in Tucson, Arizona, at Los Ventana. We hope that this is the beginning of many, and we look forward to seeing you all there live or live stream.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And if people are interested in finding you, where should they go online?
Start probably with just Nasha, drnasha.com, drnasha.com, because it'll take you to all the other things. That's a good starting point. Like you said earlier, the video that kind of gives a little bit of my story, but that's also where you can learn about my books. You can learn about conferences. You can watch thousands of hours of podcasts and things that you can watch and download and learn from, including this beautiful conversation that you and I had recently on the Metabolic Matters podcast. And you can also just join our newsletter to keep on top of all the things that we have going on and the way we are truly making a ripple in the world of oncology.
I love it. Well, I can't encourage you guys more to please go and check out Dr. Nasha's work. She's doing incredible work in this space. And thank you again so much for being here.
My absolute honor. And thank you for all you do as well.
Thank you for being here today. Please enjoy a previous episode of Born to Heal. And if you found value in our conversation, please subscribe and share with someone who might benefit. Have questions? Drop them in the YouTube comments or message me on Instagram. Links are in the episode description. And remember, just like me, You were born to heal.